The sound of gunfire echoed through the dusty streets of Willow Creek as Zara Bennett ducked behind a water trough, her heart hammering against her ribs. She hadn't been in town more than an hour, and already she'd stumbled into the middle of some Wild West chaos. The stagecoach that had deposited her along with her single trunk of belongings had barely disappeared over the horizon when the shooting started. Montana Territory, 1885, was proving to be exactly as wild as she'd feared. "Stay down, madam," a deep voice commanded from somewhere to her left. Zara pressed herself closer to the wooden trough, the damp seeping into her once fine traveling dress. The dark blue fabric, already dusty from the journey, would be ruined. Not that it mattered much anymore. Nothing from her old life in Boston seemed to matter here. Another shot rang out, followed by the sound of breaking glass. A man's pained yell pierced the air, then silence fell upon the street like a heavy blanket. "Is it over?" Zara whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "I reckon it is," came the reply as boots crunched on the dirt beside her. She looked up to see a tall man standing over her, blocking the harsh Montana sun. His broad shoulders were outlined in golden light, giving him an almost angelic appearance despite the gun holstered at his hip. He extended a hand toward her, and Zara hesitated before taking it. "Name's Dawson Reed," he said, pulling her effortlessly to her feet. "Sheriff of Willow Creek, and you're either very brave or very foolish to be wandering the streets during a showdown with the Blackwell gang." "I'm neither," Zara replied, brushing dust from her skirts with trembling hands. "I'm simply new to town. The stagecoach just dropped me off." Sheriff Reed's expression softened slightly as he took in her city clothes and the large trunk sitting abandoned near the stagecoach stop. "You must be the new schoolteacher." "I am." Zara straightened her back, attempting to regain some dignity. "Zara Bennett. I was told someone would meet me, but—" "That would have been Mrs. Holloway, but her youngest took ill this morning." The sheriff glanced down the street where a group of men were now dragging what appeared to be a body from the saloon. "Welcome to Willow Creek, Miss Bennett. Not exactly the greeting we had planned." Zara followed his gaze and quickly looked away, her stomach turning. "Is he dead?" "Yes, madam. Billy Blackwell won't be troubling our town anymore." Sheriff Reed touched the brim of his hat. "Let me help you with your trunk. The schoolhouse has living quarters attached. It's not much, but it's yours for as long as you're teaching here." As they walked down the main street, Zara felt eyes on her from every direction. Women paused in their errands to stare, while men removed their hats in greeting. She held her head high, though inside she was trembling. This wild frontier town was a far cry from the civilized world she had left behind, a world that had become impossible for her to remain in after what had happened. "The schoolhouse is just past the church," Sheriff Reed explained, carrying her trunk as if it weighed nothing. His broad shoulders strained against his shirt, and Zara found herself noticing the way the sun had bronzed his skin, so different from the pale gentleman of Boston society. "How many children will I be teaching?" she asked, forcing her thoughts back to the task at hand. "About 20, ages 6 to 16. Some only come when their families don't need them working the farms or ranches." He cast a sideways glance at her. "Town's been without a teacher for 6 months now. The children have gone a bit wild." "I'm sure I can manage," Zara replied, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She had taught before, but in a proper Boston ladies' seminary with rigid rules and expectations. What did she know of frontier children? They reached a modest white clapboard building with a small bell tower. Next to it stood a tiny cottage, hardly bigger than the parlor in her family's Boston home. "This is it," Sheriff Reed said, setting down her trunk. "Schoolhouse and your quarters. Mrs. Holloway stocked your pantry and left some supper for you. School begins Monday morning." That gave her 3 days to prepare. Zara nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the reality of her situation. She was truly alone here, thousands of miles from everything familiar. "Thank you, Sheriff Reed." "Dawson," he corrected with a slight smile that transformed his serious face. "Everyone calls me Dawson." "Thank you, Dawson," she repeated, the name feeling strangely intimate on her tongue. He tipped his hat again. "If you need anything, my office is across from the general store. The jail's attached, so I'm there most nights too." He hesitated, then added, "Willow Creek's a good town, Miss Bennett. What you saw today, it's not common. Most folks here are decent, hard-working people." As he walked away, Zara couldn't help but watch his retreating figure. There was something about the way he carried himself, confident yet not arrogant, strong but not threatening, that she found oddly comforting. Inside her new home, Zara surveyed the sparse furnishings. A small bed with a patchwork quilt occupied one corner. A wood stove, table with 2 chairs, and a single bookshelf completed the main room. A curtain partially concealed a washing area. Everything was clean but worn with age and use. On the table sat a covered dish with a note propped against it. "Welcome to Willow Creek. Chicken and dumplings inside. Martha Holloway." The simple kindness brought tears to Zara's eyes. She sank into a chair, the events of the day of the past month finally catching up to her. She had fled Boston in disgrace, her reputation in tatters after rejecting the advances of William Northcott, son of her father's business partner. His revenge had been swift and devastating, spreading rumors that painted her as a woman of loose morals who had tried to seduce him. No one had believed her side of the story, not even her own parents, who had arranged for her to take this position in Montana territory far enough away to avoid the scandal touching their name any further. "You'll teach for 1 year," her father had said, not meeting her eyes as he handed her the train ticket. "By then, perhaps this unfortunate business will have blown over." Unfortunate business. As if her ruined reputation were merely an inconvenience, rather than the destruction of her entire future. The worst part was how William had cornered her that night at the Prestons' ball, his hands rough as he pulled her into an empty study, his breath hot with whiskey as he pressed himself against her. "You've been teasing me for months," he'd hissed, fumbling with the buttons of her gown. "It's time you delivered what your eyes have been promising." She'd fought him off, striking his face hard enough to draw blood before fleeing the room. But in society's eyes, she was the one at fault, the temptress who had led a respected gentleman astray, then cruelly rejected him. Now here she was, in a town where no one knew her name or her shame. A place where she could start anew if she could overcome her fear of men and what they might do to her when alone. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd be sleeping alone for the first time in her life. In Boston, she'd always shared a room with her younger sister. Here, there was no one to hear her if she screamed in the night. As darkness fell over her little cottage, Zara prepared for bed with shaking hands. She barricaded the door with a chair wedged beneath the handle, and kept a kitchen knife within reach on the small table beside her bed. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by nightmares where William's face morphed into those of unknown men, rough frontier types who chased her through endless dusty streets. When morning finally came, she was exhausted but relieved to have survived her first night in Willow Creek. Saturday brought curious visitors. First came Mrs. Holloway, a round woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands, bringing fresh bread and introductions. "My Samuel's just turned 7 and he's wild as they come," she explained, "but he's quick with numbers. My Emma's 12 and reads better than most grown folk in town." Then the general store owner's wife arrived with fabric for curtains. The blacksmith's daughter brought eggs. By midday, Zara had met half the town's women, each bringing small gifts and barely concealed curiosity about the young woman from Boston who had come to teach their children. None asked why she had traveled so far alone. For that, Zara was grateful. On Sunday, she attended the small church service, feeling every eye upon her as Pastor Miller introduced her to the congregation. She sat stiffly in her pew, aware of the whispers that followed her. Not malicious whispers, but the natural curiosity of a small town confronted with someone new. She noticed Sheriff Reed Dawson sitting several rows back, his gaze meeting hers briefly before returning to the pastor. Unlike the other men in their Sunday best, he still wore his gun belt, the responsibilities of his position apparently never ending. After the service, as people gathered outside to socialize, Zara found herself surrounded by children eager to meet their new teacher. She smiled and answered their questions, finding her anxiety easing in their innocent presence. Miss Bennett. She turned to find Dawson standing nearby, hat in hand. In the daylight, she could see his eyes were a deep green, startling against his sun-darkened skin. "Sheriff Reed," she acknowledged with a nod. "I was wondering if you might need any assistance preparing the schoolhouse for tomorrow." "It's been sitting empty for some time." The offer surprised her. "That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to take you from your duties." A smile played at the corners of his mouth. Sunday afternoons are usually quiet in Willow Creek. Most folks are home having dinner or napping through the pastor's sermon. This coaxed a small laugh from her. "In that case, I would appreciate the help." They walked together to the schoolhouse, maintaining a proper distance between them that nonetheless felt intimate in the small town setting where everyone watched with interest. The schoolhouse was dusty, but otherwise in good condition. Together they opened windows to air out the staleness, swept floors, and arranged the desks in neat rows. "How long have you been sheriff here?" Zara asked as they worked, curious about the man who seemed so different from the rough cowboys and miners she'd seen in town. 5 years, he replied, moving a heavy desk with ease. "Came out from Pennsylvania after the war, needed a fresh start." "You fought in the war?" she asked, trying to calculate his age. He couldn't be much over 30. "Joined up in '63 when I was 17, saw the last 2 years of fighting." His expression darkened momentarily. "Enough to last a lifetime." Zara nodded, understanding something of what it meant to seek a new beginning far from home. "And you chose to become a sheriff in a frontier town," Dawson's smile returned. "Seemed better than mining or ranching." "I've always had a good sense for trouble and how to stop it before it starts." He paused in his work, looking at her directly. "What about you, Miss Bennett? What brings a Boston lady to Willow Creek?" The question she'd been dreading. Zara busied herself arranging books on a shelf. "I wanted adventure," she said lightly, "and the opportunity to make a difference. Is that all?" His tone was gentle, not prying but somehow seeing more than she wished to reveal. She met his gaze steadily. "Sometimes a fresh start is needed, Sheriff. I believe you understand that better than most." Something passed between them, then a recognition of shared experience despite their different backgrounds. He nodded once and returned to work, asking no more questions about her past. By late afternoon, the schoolhouse was ready. Zara stood at the teacher's desk, surveying the room with satisfaction. 20 desks in neat rows, books organized by subject, a clean slate awaiting tomorrow's lessons. "Thank you for your help," she said as Dawson prepared to leave. "I'm not sure I could have managed alone." "You would have," he replied with certainty. "But I'm glad to have been of service." He paused at the door. "You'll do well here, Miss Bennett. These children need someone who cares enough to come all this way to teach them." His confidence in her abilities warmed something inside Zara that had been cold since that night in Boston. "I hope you're right." "I usually am," he said with a hint of amusement. "About people anyway. Good day, Miss Bennett." That night, Zara slept better despite her nervousness about the first day of school. The knife remained by her bedside, but she didn't wedge the chair against the door. Somehow, knowing Dawson Reed was watching over the town made her feel safer than she had in months. Monday morning arrived with bright sunshine and the sound of children's voices. Zara smoothed her simple navy dress, pinned her hair into a neat bun, and took a deep breath before ringing the school bell for the first time. 22 children filed in more than she'd expected. They ranged from tiny Samuel Holloway, missing his front teeth, to lanky teenagers who eyed her with adolescent skepticism. Boys in worn but clean shirts and trousers. Girls in simple dresses with neatly braided hair, all watching her with varying degrees of curiosity and wariness. "Good morning," she began, her teacher's voice coming back to her naturally. I am Miss Bennett, and I am very pleased to meet all of you. By midday, Zara had learned that frontier children were indeed different from the well-bred young ladies she'd taught in Boston. They were more direct in their questions, less constrained by social niceties, and possessed a practical knowledge of the world that sometimes startled her. But they were eager to learn. Even the older boys who pretended indifference revealed their intelligence when coaxed. At the end of that first day, exhausted but exhilarated, Zara stood at the schoolhouse door watching her students disperse. Some walked toward town, others climbed into wagons driven by parents or older siblings. Survived the first day, I see. She turned to find Dawson approaching, amusement in his eyes. Barely, she admitted with a smile. They're energetic. That's one word for it. He glanced at the retreating children. No bloodshed, though. I consider that a success. Zara laughed, surprising herself with the genuine sound. The day isn't over yet. I wouldn't count my victories too soon. His expression grew more serious. Actually, I came to warn you. We've had reports of the remaining Blackwell gang members in the area. Billy's brothers aren't taking his death well. The laughter died in her throat. Are we in danger? Probably not, he assured her. But I'd feel better if you'd lock your doors early tonight and maybe visit the general store now rather than later. I've doubled patrols, but it doesn't hurt to be cautious. She nodded, suddenly reminded of how dangerous this territory could be. Thank you for the warning. It's my job to keep the peace, he said simply, and to protect the citizens of Willow Creek. As he walked away, Zara couldn't help but feel there was something more personal in his concern for her safety. Or perhaps she merely wished it were so. The days fell into a pattern. School from 8 until 3. Afternoons spent grading papers or preparing lessons. Evenings alone in her little cottage. Sometimes Dawson would stop by the schoolhouse after classes ended, ostensibly to check that everything was in order, but their conversations increasingly strayed to topics beyond town safety. She learned he had been raised by a widowed mother who had instilled in him a love of books. He discovered she played the piano and missed music terribly. They discussed literature and debated politics with a freedom Zara had never experienced with a man before. 2 weeks after her arrival, a spring storm descended upon Willow Creek, bringing driving rain that turned the streets to mud. School was dismissed early, and Zara hurried home through the downpour, arriving soaked to the skin despite her umbrella. She had just changed into dry clothes when a knock came at her door. Wary, she called out, "Who is it?" Dawson Reed. "Sorry to bother you, Miss Bennett, but I need to check all the buildings along this row. The creek's rising fast." She opened the door to find him standing in the rain, water streaming from his hat brim. "Come in before you drown," she said, stepping back. "I can't stay," he said, though he did step inside, bringing the scent of rain and leather with him. "Just wanted to warn you, if the water reaches the churchyard, we'll need to evacuate this side of town. Pack what you can in case we need to move quickly." Alarm shot through her. "Is that likely? It's happened before." His gaze moved quickly around her small home. "Do you have everything you need? Enough food if we're cut off for a few days?" "I think so," she said, though in truth she hadn't thought to prepare for such an emergency. He seemed to read her uncertainty. "I'll have Mrs. Holloway bring over some extra supplies. Her house is on higher ground, so she'll be fine." He started to leave, then paused. "If there's anything precious to you, keep it ready to grab quickly." The only truly precious thing she possessed was a locket containing a miniature portrait of her sister. Zara touched it where it hung beneath her high collar. "I will, please be careful out there." Something in her tone made him look at her more closely. "I always am," he assured her, and there was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before. After he left, Zara gathered the few items she couldn't bear to lose: her mother's Bible, her sister's last letter, a small box of keepsakes, and placed them in a carpet bag. Then she waited, listening to the rain hammer against the roof and windows. Night fell early under the heavy clouds. Zara lit her lamps and tried to distract herself with lesson planning, but her attention kept drifting to the sound of the rising wind, and the occasional shouts she heard from town. Another knock came just after 8 o'clock. This time when she opened the door, she found Dawson accompanied by Mr. Peterson from the general store. "We need to move you now," Dawson said without preamble. "The creek's breached its banks near the mill, water's heading this way." Mr. Peterson nodded gravely. "My wife's got a room ready for you, Miss Bennett. Our place is on the hill, should be safe enough." Zara grabbed her carpet bag and a shawl. "What about the schoolhouse?" "The books, we've got men moving what they can to the church," Dawson assured her. "Your safety comes first." Outside, the rain had lessened slightly, but the wind drove it horizontally against them as they made their way through the muddy streets. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness as townspeople moved belongings to higher ground. Halfway to the Petersons' home, a massive cracking sound split the night. Zara looked back to see a large tree toppling toward them. "Look out," Dawson shouted, grabbing her around the waist and throwing them both sideways into the mud as the tree crashed down where they had been standing. For a terrifying moment, Zara found herself pressed beneath him, his body shielding hers from the rain and debris. Their faces were inches apart, his breath warm against her cheek. Despite the danger, her heart raced for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. "No," she whispered, acutely aware of his proximity and the strange feeling of safety it gave her despite everything. He helped her to her feet, his hand lingering on her arm longer than necessary. "Mr. Peterson had already moved ahead to clear a path around the fallen tree. "Thank you," Zara said, finding her voice again. "You saved my life." Dawson's eyes held hers in the dim lantern light. "Just doing my job, Miss Bennett," but they both knew it was more than that. The Petersons' home was crowded with refugees from the lower part of town. Mrs. Peterson, a brisk woman with practical hands, showed Zara to a small room normally occupied by their grown daughter. "It's not much, but it's dry," she said, lighting a lamp. "There's nightclothes in the drawer there. Hannah's a bit taller than you, but they'll do." "Thank you," Zara said, suddenly exhausted. "I'm very grateful for your hospitality." "Nonsense, we take care of our own in Willow Creek," Mrs. Peterson replied matter-of-factly. "And you're one of us now, one of us." The simple acceptance brought unexpected tears to Zara's eyes. She had been in Willow Creek less than a month, yet these people were taking her in without question, making her part of their community in a way she had never experienced in Boston's rigid social hierarchy. From downstairs came the sound of men's voices as more arrived seeking shelter. Zara recognized Dawson's deep tones giving directions, organizing even in crisis. A natural leader, she thought, remembering how he had shielded her from the falling tree without hesitation. She changed into the borrowed nightgown, washed as best she could with the basin of water Mrs. Peterson had provided, and slipped into the narrow bed. Despite the storm and unfamiliar surroundings, she fell asleep quickly, dreaming of strong arms around her and green eyes that saw too much. Morning revealed the storm's damage. The creek had indeed flooded, leaving the lower part of town under several inches of water. The schoolhouse had survived, though water had seeped under the door and warped some of the floorboards. "It could have been much worse," Pastor Miller told the gathered townspeople at an impromptu meeting in the church. "Last big flood in '78 took out half the buildings on Front Street." Dawson stood at the front, outlining recovery plans. His shirt was still damp, his hair tousled, and Zara suspected he hadn't slept at all. Yet he spoke with calm authority that reassured everyone. "School will be closed for the rest of the week," he announced, glancing at Zara. "Once the water recedes, we'll need to check the building for structural damage before it's safe for the children." The news was met with mixed reactions from her students, who had spotted her in the crowd. The younger ones looked disappointed, while the teenagers tried to hide their delight at the unexpected holiday. After the meeting, Dawson approached her. "Your cottage seems okay from the outside, but I'd like to check it before you go back in. The foundation might be compromised." "Of course," Zara agreed. Mrs. Peterson has kindly said I can stay with them until it's safe. He nodded, looking relieved. Good. I've got men working on diverting the water away from the residential areas, but it'll be a day or two before things dry out. You should rest, she said, noting the shadows under his eyes. You look exhausted. A tired smile crossed his face. Are you worried about me, Miss Bennett? It would be a shame to lose our sheriff to exhaustion after surviving a flood, she replied lightly, though her concern was genuine. I'll rest when everyone's safe, he promised. Including you. The following days were a flurry of activity as the town recovered. Unable to teach, Zara threw herself into relief efforts, helping distribute food and dry clothing to those whose homes had been damaged. She worked alongside the town's women, learning their stories and sharing their labor. Mrs. Holloway taught her to make proper biscuits. The blacksmith's wife showed her how to patch clothing quickly. Even Mrs. Peterson, despite her brisk manner, took time to teach Zara how to preserve vegetables for the coming winter. A schoolteacher needs practical knowledge too, she insisted when Zara protested that she was taking too much of their time. Book learning is fine, but out here, knowing how to survive matters more. Dawson was everywhere during those days, organizing work crews, salvaging damaged goods, ensuring no one was taking advantage of the disaster to loot abandoned properties. Occasionally their paths would cross, and each time Zara felt that same flutter in her chest that both frightened and excited her. On the third day after the flood, he came to the Petersons while Zara was helping prepare dinner. Your cottage is safe, he announced. Water came up to the step but didn't get inside. I had the men check the foundation, it's solid. Relief washed over her. That's wonderful news. When can I return? Tomorrow should be fine. The street's still muddy but passable. He hesitated, then added, I can escort you back in the morning, help you carry anything you need. Mrs. Peterson, kneading bread nearby, gave Zara a knowing look that made her blush. That would be very kind, Zara replied, focusing on the vegetables she was chopping to hide her reaction. The next morning dawned clear and bright, as if the storm had never happened. Dawson arrived early, looking somewhat more rested than he had in days. He'd shaved and changed into a clean shirt, Zara noticed, and wondered if he'd done so for her benefit. Ready to go home? He asked, taking her carpet bag despite her protests that she could manage. Home. It struck her then that she had indeed begun to think of the little cottage as home, despite its humble nature compared to her parents' Boston mansion. They walked slowly through town, stopping occasionally as people greeted them and updated Dawson on repairs. Zara noticed how respectfully everyone spoke to him and how he knew each person by name, asking after specific concerns with genuine interest. You're good at this, she observed as they continued toward her cottage. Being sheriff, caring for the town. He looked surprised by the compliment. It's just the job. No, she shook her head. Many men with a badge would simply enforce the law. You build community. Dawson was quiet for a moment. My father was a sheriff too, back in Pennsylvania. He taught me that the badge doesn't give you authority, the trust of the people does. His expression darkened slightly. I've seen what happens when that trust is broken. They had reached her cottage. Dawson opened the door and stepped inside first, checking that everything was as it should be before allowing her to enter. The cottage was just as she had left it, though the air was stale. Zara moved to open a window while Dawson set her bag on the table. I should be going, he said, though he made no move toward the door. Plenty still to do in town. Would you like some coffee first? She offered impulsively. It's the least I can do to thank you for everything. He hesitated, then nodded. That would be nice. Zara busied herself with the stove and coffee pot, aware of him watching her movements. The cottage seemed smaller with him in it, his presence filling the space in a way that was both unsettling and oddly right. How did you become a teacher? He asked as she handed him a steaming cup. She sat across from him at the small table. My mother was one before she married. She educated my sister and me at home until we were old enough for formal schooling. The memory brought a smile to her face. I always loved learning, and I discovered I loved helping others learn too. And Boston society approved of a young lady teaching. A shadow crossed her face. It was considered an acceptable occupation for a woman of good family who needed to support herself, better than becoming a governess or companion at least, needed to support yourself. He echoed, his perception sharp as always. I got the impression your family was well established. Zara stared into her coffee. The teaching position here was arranged for other reasons. Dawson set his cup down gently. You're running from something. It wasn't a question, and she didn't treat it as one. The moment stretched between them, taut with unspoken truths. Finally, she looked up and met his gaze. Yes, he waited, not pushing but making space for her to continue if she chose. The words came slowly at first, then in a rush as she told him everything: William's assault, the rumors, her parents' disbelief, the shame and exile disguised as opportunity. Throughout her story, Dawson's expression remained steady, though she saw his jaw tighten and his fingers curl into a fist when she described William's attack. So you see, she concluded, her voice barely above a whisper, I'm damaged goods in Boston society. My parents hope a year away will allow the scandal to fade, but I know better. There's no going back. Do you want to go back? Dawson asked quietly. The question startled her. No one had asked what she wanted since this all began. No, she realized. Even before this happened, I felt constrained there, always careful to say the right thing, behave the proper way, never show too much intelligence or independence. She looked around the tiny cottage. Here I have less, but I'm more myself than I've ever been. Dawson nodded, understanding in his eyes. Freedom comes in strange packages sometimes. What about you? She asked. You mentioned needing a fresh start after the war. What were you running from? A shadow passed over his face. The man I became during fighting. I did things. He stopped, shook his head. War changes you, makes you capable of actions you never thought possible. When it ended, I couldn't go home and pretend to be the same boy who left. So you came west. Worked my way across the country for a few years. Ranch hand, freight driver, even dealt cards for a while. A rueful smile touched his lips. Then I broke up a bar fight in a town not far from here. The local sheriff offered me a deputy position on the spot. Said I had a natural authority that made men listen. When he retired, I moved here to take the sheriff's badge, and found your place, Zara observed. I believe I have, he agreed, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart quicken. What about you, Zara? Could Willow Creek be your place too? It was the first time he had used her given name, and the intimacy of it sent a tremor through her. I don't know, she answered honestly. I signed a contract for 1 year. And after that, the question hung between them, laden with possibilities neither was ready to name. Dawson finished his coffee and stood. I should go. People will talk if I stay too long. They'll talk anyway, Zara said with a small smile. Mrs. Peterson already gave me quite the knowing look when you offered to escort me home, he laughed, the sound warming the small room. Small towns. No secrets. Except the ones we keep, she replied softly. At the door, he turned back. Thank you for trusting me with your story. It changes nothing about who you are in my eyes, except perhaps I respect you even more for your courage. The words were a balm to wounds she hadn't realized were still so raw. Thank you for listening, and for not judging. Never that, he said firmly. Get some rest, Zara. School reopens on Monday. After he left, Zara stood in the doorway watching his retreating figure. For the first time since that terrible night in Boston, she felt truly seen by a man, not as an object of desire or a ruined woman, but as herself. It was terrifying and exhilarating. The schoolhouse required only minor repairs, and classes resumed the following week. Life in Willow Creek returned to its normal rhythms, though Zara found her place in the community had subtly shifted. Having worked alongside the town's women during the crisis, she was no longer viewed as merely the teacher or the Boston lady, but as a neighbor who had proven her worth. Invitations to Sunday dinners increased. Mothers sought her advice on their children's education with more confidence. Even the older girls in town began to visit her cottage, asking questions about life in the East that gradually extended to more personal matters of the heart. "Is it true you turned down a wealthy man in Boston?" 15-year-old Emma Holloway asked one afternoon as she helped Zara organize the schoolhouse library. Zara nearly dropped the book she was holding. "Where did you hear that?" Emma shrugged, not meeting her eyes. "People talk. They say you came west because of a broken engagement." Close enough to the truth to be unsettling but preferable to the actual scandal, Zara considered how to respond. "The circumstances of my coming here were complicated," she said carefully, "but I'm glad to be in Willow Creek now." Emma shelved another book. "Sheriff Reed seems glad too." Heat rushed to Zara's face. "What do you mean?" "He never used to stop by the schoolhouse before you came," Emma said with the devastating directness of youth. "Now he finds reasons to ride past almost every day." Zara hadn't realized their interactions were so noticeable. The sheriff is simply doing his duty, checking on a new resident. Emma's skeptical look said she wasn't fooled. "If you say so, Miss Bennett." Later that week, Dawson proved Emma right by appearing at the schoolhouse just as classes ended. The children filed past him with knowing grins that made Zara want to sink through the floorboards. "Sheriff Reed," she greeted him formally, aware of several students lingering nearby to watch. "What brings you here?" "Official business," he replied, though his eyes held a warmth that contradicted his serious tone. "Town council meeting tonight. We're discussing the Harvest Festival next month. As schoolteacher, your input would be valuable." It was a reasonable request, yet Zara suspected it was at least partly a pretext. "Of course." "What time?" 7 o'clock at the town hall. "I could escort you if you'd like." He added casually, "It can run late and the streets are dark." "That would be appreciated," she said, ignoring the giggle she heard from behind the woodpile where Emma and her friend Susie were supposedly gathering kindling. That evening, Zara took extra care with her appearance, selecting her best dress, a deep green that brought out the amber flecks in her eyes, and arranging her hair in a style more elegant than her usual practical bun. She told herself it was simply appropriate for a town meeting, but the flutter in her stomach when Dawson knocked at her door suggested otherwise. His appreciative glance as she opened the door confirmed she had achieved the desired effect. "You look lovely," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you." She took it, feeling the solid strength of him through his sleeve. "Is this truly town business, or did you invent an excuse to call on me properly?" Dawson's surprised laugh told her she'd guessed correctly. "Both," he admitted as they walked toward the town hall. "There is a meeting and your input is valuable, but I could have simply told you about it after school." "I'm glad you didn't," she said, feeling bold in the gathering twilight. The meeting itself was rather dull discussions of harvest yields, preparations for winter, and the upcoming festival that would mark the end of the growing season. Zara contributed ideas for the children's participation and volunteered to organize games. What made the evening memorable was not the meeting but what followed. As they walked back to her cottage under a canopy of stars, Dawson told her stories of his first awkward months as sheriff, making her laugh with tales of mistaken identities and escaped livestock. At her door, he hesitated. "Would you allow me to call on you properly? Sunday afternoon, perhaps?" The formal request, so at odds with their easy companionship of recent weeks, touched her deeply. "I would like that very much," she replied. He took her hand and raised it to his lips, the gesture gentlemanly but sending a thrill through her nonetheless. "Until Sunday, then." Sunday couldn't come fast enough. Zara spent Saturday cleaning her already tidy cottage and baking cookies using Mrs. Peterson's recipe. She picked wildflowers to brighten the table and fretted over which dress to wear. By the time Dawson knocked on her door the following afternoon, she had changed her outfit 3 times, settling finally on a simple blue dress that matched her eyes. He arrived with a small gift, a book of poetry he had ordered from Denver. I remembered you mentioning you missed your father's library, he explained as she unwrapped it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture moved her nearly to tears. This is perfect, she said, running her fingers over the embossed leather cover. How did you know Tennyson is my favorite? You quoted him once when we were discussing the children's education, something about knowledge coming but wisdom lingering. The fact that he had not only remembered her words, but identified the poet impressed her deeply. They spent the afternoon talking about books, sharing favorite passages, and discovering a mutual love of history and philosophy. Most people are surprised that a lawman enjoys reading, Dawson admitted. They expect me to be good with a gun but not with ideas. Most people see only what they expect to see, Zara replied. I've learned that painful lesson myself. Their conversation flowed easily from literature to personal histories. He told her more about his childhood in Pennsylvania, his mother's determination to educate him despite limited means, his father's legacy of fair and compassionate law enforcement. She shared stories of her sister, her education, and her dreams of perhaps someday opening a school of her own where girls could learn more than just the accomplishments society deemed appropriate. You could do that here, Dawson suggested. Willow Creek is growing. In a few years, we'll need more than one teacher. The idea took root in her mind, a possibility she hadn't considered. Perhaps I could, she mused, allowing herself to imagine a future in this place that had begun to feel like home. As autumn progressed, Dawson's Sunday visits became a regular occurrence. Sometimes they walked along the creek, now safely within its banks again. Other times they sat in her small parlor reading together or simply talking. Occasionally, they joined other couples for community gatherings, gradually acknowledging without words that they were courting. The town observed their growing attachment with approval. Zara had proven herself during the flood and in her dedicated teaching. Dawson had long been respected for his fairness and courage. Together, they made sense in a way that required no explanation. Only at night, alone in her narrow bed, did Zara's fears return. Despite the growing affection between them, she had flinched the one time Dawson had attempted to kiss her, turning her face so his lips brushed her cheek instead. He had stepped back immediately, apology in his eyes, asking no questions but clearly concerned. How could she explain that it wasn't him she feared, but the memories that his touch evoked? That William's attempted assault had left her terrified of physical intimacy, even with a man she was growing to love. The word had slipped into her thoughts unbidden but undeniable. She did love Dawson Reed, his integrity, his intelligence, his gentle strength. But could she ever overcome her fear enough to become his wife in every sense? The thought of a man's bed, even his, filled her with dread. The harvest festival arrived in a blaze of autumn colors. The town square was decorated with corn shocks and pumpkins, tables laden with the bounty of local farms. Children ran relay races organized by Zara, while adults competed in everything from pie baking to horseshoe pitching. As twilight fell, lanterns were lit and a local fiddler struck up a tune. Couples moved to the cleared area in front of the general store to dance. "May I have this dance, Miss Bennett?" Dawson asked formally, extending his hand. Zara hesitated only briefly before placing her fingers in his. "You may, Sheriff Reed." He led her into the circle of dancers, his hand respectfully at her waist, maintaining a proper distance between them. Yet even that light touch sent awareness coursing through her, not fear this time, but a tingling anticipation. As they moved through the steps of the dance, other couples around them blurred into insignificance. Zara was conscious only of Dawson's green eyes holding hers, his hand warm and steady at her waist, the way his breath caught when she smiled up at him. "You're beautiful," he said softly, for her ears alone. "Every day I thank whatever fate brought you to Willow Creek. Even though I arrived during a gunfight," she teased, trying to lighten the intensity of the moment, "especially then, gave me the chance to play hero right from the start." His smile faded into seriousness. "Zara, there's something I need to ask you," her heart stuttered. "Yes." But before he could continue, a commotion erupted at the edge of the square. Shouts and the sound of galloping horses shattered the festive atmosphere. "It's the Blackwells," someone cried. "They're back." Dawson's expression transformed instantly from tender to alert. "Get inside," he ordered, already moving away from her. "Everyone inside now." Chaos erupted as people scattered, parents grabbing children, shopkeepers ushering customers into buildings. Zara helped Mrs. Holloway gather her youngest children, shepherding them toward the nearest store. Gunshots rang out, too close for comfort. Through the confusion, Zara glimpsed Dawson and his deputy moving strategically toward the sound, weapons drawn. "Come on, mister," Peterson urged, pulling her into the general store where others were already taking cover. From the window, Zara watched in horror as 3 riders thundered into the square, firing wildly into the air and at the buildings. She recognized Dawson taking position behind a water trough, his deputy flanking from the opposite side. "We want Reed," one of the riders shouted. "Send out the sheriff who murdered our brother." "Your brother drew on me first," Dawson called back, his voice steady. "You boys turn around now and ride out, or you'll meet the same fate." The leader of the trio, a bearded man with a filthy bandana around his neck, spat on the ground. 3 against 1, lawman. You won't be walking away this time." 3 against 2, corrected the deputy, revealing his position. "And the whole town backing us." Indeed, from several windows, Zara could see the barrels of rifles extending. The men of Willow Creek might not wear badges, but they were prepared to defend their town. The standoff stretched for several tense moments. Then, with shocking suddenness, the bearded man raised his gun toward the general store window where several women and children were visible. "Let's see how brave you are when innocent blood is spilled," he snarled. Dawson moved with incredible speed, firing twice in rapid succession. The bearded man toppled from his horse, dead before he hit the ground. His companions wheeled their mounts, returning fire as they retreated. One of their wild shots shattered the window near where Zara stood. She felt a searing pain across her upper arm as glass and bullet fragments tore through her sleeve. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 2 minutes. As quickly as they had arrived, the remaining Blackwells fled, pursued by the deputy and several armed townsmen. Dawson rushed into the store, his face pale with fear. "Is anyone hurt?" "Zara's bleeding," Mrs. Peterson said, already moving to examine the wound. Dawson was at her side instantly. "How bad?" "Just a graze," Zara assured him, though the pain was becoming more intense as shock wore off. The glass did more damage than the bullet. His hands shook slightly as he helped Mrs. Peterson cut away the sleeve of Zara's dress to reveal a shallow but messy wound. "Doc Miller's at his office," he said. "I'll take you there." Despite her protests that she could walk, Dawson lifted her into his arms, cradling her against his chest as he carried her through the now quiet streets to the doctor's house. "I'm not dying," she muttered, embarrassed by the public display yet touched by his concern. "I know that," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But you could have been, all of you, if I had been faster." "Don't," she interrupted. "You saved everyone. No one but that awful man was killed, Doctor." Miller cleaned and bandaged her arm with efficient movements, declaring she would have a scar but no lasting damage. Throughout the procedure, Dawson remained by her side, his face grim with self-recrimination. "I'm keeping you under observation tonight," the doctor told Zara. "Head wounds and bullet grazes can turn nasty if infection sets in." "I'll stay with her," Dawson said immediately. Dr. Miller raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I'll be in the next room if needed." When they were alone, Dawson pulled a chair close to the examination table where Zara sat, her bandaged arm throbbing dully thanks to the laudanum Dr. Miller had given her. "I'm sorry," he said, taking her uninjured hand between both of his. "This is exactly what I feared when I took this job, that people I care about would be hurt because of me." "It wasn't because of you," Zara insisted. "It was because of the men who chose violence and revenge." He shook his head. I killed their brother, who would have killed you first." She squeezed his hand. "Dawson, look at me." When he raised his eyes to hers, the anguish she saw there made her heart ache. Without thinking, she leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle kiss. The contact lasted only seconds, but it changed everything. His initial surprise gave way to tender response, his hand coming up to cup her cheek with exquisite care. When they parted, Zara was trembling not with fear, but with the realization that her body had responded to his kiss with warmth rather than dread. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," she admitted, "but I was afraid." Understanding dawned in his eyes. "Because of what happened in Boston," she nodded. "I thought I might never want a man's touch again, but with you." She searched for words. "It's different. I'm not afraid of you." "I would never hurt you," he vowed. "Never pressure you. If all we ever shared were conversations and occasional kisses like that one, it would be enough." But they both knew it wouldn't be not for a marriage, which was clearly where their relationship was heading. "What were you going to ask me?" she said suddenly, remembering his words before the interruption. "At the dance," a rueful smile touched his lips. "I was going to ask if you might consider staying in Willow Creek when your teaching contract ends, permanently, with me." Despite the pain in her arm and the trauma of the evening, joy bubbled up inside her. "Are you proposing, Sheriff Reed?" "Not officially. Not yet." His thumb traced gentle patterns on her palm. "I wanted to make sure you weren't planning to return to Boston before I presumed to ask for your hand." "I have no desire to return to Boston," she said honestly. "My life is here now." "With me?" he asked, vulnerability evident in his voice. "With you," she confirmed, "if you'll be patient with me with my fears." He brought her hand to his lips. "All the time you need, Zara. We have the rest of our lives." The following weeks brought changes to Willow Creek. The remaining Blackwell brothers were captured 2 counties over and sent to the territorial prison. The Harvest Festival was completed a week late, but with even greater enthusiasm, as if the town needed to prove that violence couldn't diminish their community spirit. Zara's arm healed with only a thin scar to show for her ordeal. She returned to teaching, though Dawson insisted on escorting her to and from school each day, a precaution that fooled no one about his true motives. Their courtship progressed with a sweetness that surprised them both. Dawson was true to his word, never pushing Zara beyond her comfort. Their kisses grew longer, more passionate, but he always let her set the pace, drawing back when she tensed or hesitated. As winter settled over Montana territory, bringing snow that transformed Willow Creek into a glistening wonderland, Dawson formally proposed during a sleigh ride on Christmas Eve. The ring he offered had belonged to his grandmother, a simple gold band with a small sapphire that matched Zara's eyes. "It's not fancy," he apologized, "nothing like what Boston gentlemen might offer." "It's perfect," she assured him, extending her trembling hand so he could slide it onto her finger. "And yes, Dawson Reed, I will marry you." They agreed to a spring wedding, when travel would be easier for the few distant friends they wished to invite. Zara wrote to her sister with the news, receiving back a letter of delighted congratulations and a promise to attend despite their parents' continuing disapproval. "They'll come around," Dawson said when she shared her family's mixed reaction. "Once they meet their grandchildren." The casual reference to their future family both thrilled and terrified Zara. As their wedding approached, her old fears resurfaced. What if, when the time came, she couldn't bear his touch? What if the memories of William's assault poisoned what should be beautiful between them? Mrs. Peterson, who had become something of a surrogate mother to Zara, sensed her anxiety. One afternoon, as they prepared dress alterations for the wedding, she broached the subject with characteristic directness. "You're worried about the wedding night," she stated, not a question. Zara's cheeks flamed. That's not something I can discuss." "Of course it is, Mrs. Peterson set aside her sewing. "Zara, I know something happened to you back east. I don't need details, but I recognize the look of a woman who's been mistreated by a man." Tears pricked Zara's eyes at the simple acknowledgement. "How did you know?" "I was a nurse during the war." Saw too many women who'd encountered soldiers from both sides who took what wasn't offered. Her voice was matter-of-fact but kind. The way you flinched when men moved too quickly near you when you first arrived, I recognized it. I'm better now, Zara said. With Dawson, I'm not afraid. But still the thought of intimacy. Mrs. Peterson patted her hand. Let me tell you something. My Henry and I have been married 32 years. The first time we were together was awkward and over too quickly. Her eyes twinkled with mischief that belied her gray hair. But we got better with practice, much better. Despite her embarrassment, Zara laughed. That's encouraging. The point is, when it's with the right man, a man who respects you and cares for your pleasure as much as his own, it's nothing to fear. It's a gift. She squeezed Zara's hand. And that Dawson Reed adores the ground you walk on. He'll be patient. The conversation, though mortifying, eased some of Zara's anxiety, as did the quiet confidence Dawson showed in their future, never expressing doubt that they would overcome any obstacle together. Spring arrived with a burst of wildflowers and birdsong. The schoolhouse was transformed for the ceremony with garlands of early blooms and ribbons. Every resident of Willow Creek turned out for the wedding, along with Zara's sister Dorothy and Dawson's former commanding officer from his army days. Zara wore a gown of ivory silk that Mrs. Peterson and the other women had helped her make, with lace from her mother's wedding dress that Dorothy had smuggled west against their parents' wishes. Her hair was crowned with wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of spring blossoms. When she walked into the schoolhouse on Mr. Peterson's arm, he had insisted on standing in for her father. The look on Dawson's face was worth every moment of fear and doubt she had experienced. He stared at her as if she were the sun itself, his eyes bright with unshed tears of joy. Pastor Miller conducted the ceremony with dignity and warmth. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Dawson's kiss was tender yet filled with promise that made Zara's heart race with anticipation rather than dread. The celebration lasted well into the evening, with dancing and feasting and more goodwill than Zara had ever experienced at the formal Boston weddings of her youth. These people now her people celebrated with genuine joy for the couple who had found each other against all odds. As twilight fell, they slipped away to Dawson's house, now their home on the edge of town. It was larger than her cottage, with 3 bedrooms for our future family, he had explained when showing it to her, and a proper parlor. He had added feminine touches in preparation for her arrival: curtains, cushions, even a pianoforte ordered from Denver as a wedding gift. But it was the bedroom that held Zara's attention now. Dawson had given her time alone to change while he secured the house for the night. She sat at the dressing table in a white nightgown, brushing her hair with shaking hands when he entered. He had removed his formal coat and vest, wearing only his shirt and trousers. Their eyes met in the mirror, and the love she saw in his gaze gave her courage. "I'm nervous," she admitted as he came to stand behind her. "So am I," he confessed, surprising her. "I want tonight to be perfect for you." She set down the brush and turned to face him. "It already is, because I'm with you." Dawson knelt before her, taking her hands in his. "Zara, we don't have to do anything you're not ready for. We have our whole lives ahead of us." The tenderness of his understanding brought tears to her eyes. This was why she loved him: this respect, this care for her feelings above his own desires. "I want to be your wife," she whispered. "In every way. I'm nervous, but I'm not afraid, not with you." He rose and drew her to her feet, kissing her with a reverence that made her feel cherished beyond measure. Slowly, giving her time to withdraw if she needed, he led her to the bed they would share. What followed was not the brutality she had feared, but a gentle exploration of trust and desire. Dawson's touch was reverent, his patience infinite as he guided her past anxiety into pleasure she had never imagined possible. When they finally joined as husband and wife, Zara found not pain or fear but a completion that brought tears to her eyes. "I love you," he whispered against her hair as they lay entwined afterward. "More than I have words to express." "I love you too," she replied, marveling at the journey that had brought her from terror to this transcendent joy. "Thank you for showing me what love between a man and a woman should be." He propped himself up on one elbow to look into her eyes. "This is only the beginning, Zara Reed. We have a lifetime of love ahead of us. Promise?" she asked, suddenly needing his reassurance that this happiness wasn't fleeting. Dawson's kiss was his answer, a promise of forever sealed in the quiet darkness of their wedding night. 5 years later, "Mama, look what I found." 4-year-old Sarah Reed held up a wildflower, her green eyes so like her father's, wide with excitement. Zara set aside the book she'd been reading to her infant son and accepted the slightly crushed blossom. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. Shall we press it in my flower book?" Sarah nodded enthusiastically, her dark curls bouncing. She had Zara's hair but Dawson's determined spirit, a combination that both delighted and exhausted her parents. From the porch of their home, expanded now to accommodate their growing family, Zara could see Willow Creek spread out below them. The town had grown too, with a proper school building where she still taught 3 days a week, sharing duties with a young male teacher from back east. Her dream of establishing advanced classes for girls was becoming reality, with 5 current students pursuing studies that would prepare them for college if they chose. The sound of hoofbeats announced Dawson's return from his rounds. He dismounted with the easy grace that still made Zara's heart skip, even after 5 years of marriage. Sarah flew down the steps into his arms, squealing with delight as he swung her high. "There's my princess," he laughed, settling her on his hip as he climbed the stairs to kiss his wife. "And how are my beautiful wife and little Daniel today?" "We're well," Zara replied, leaning into his kiss. "He's just gone down for his nap and Sarah's been collecting flowers for my press." "Papa, can we go fishing tomorrow like you promised?" Sarah asked, playing with the badge on his vest. "If your mama says it's all right," Dawson replied, setting her down and taking his sleeping son into his arms with a tenderness that still moved Zara deeply. Later, after the children were asleep, they sat together on the porch swing, watching the stars appear over Willow Creek. Dawson's arm around her shoulders, Zara's head resting against him in the comfortable intimacy of long marriage. "You ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "Coming west, marrying a simple lawman instead of some Boston gentleman?" Zara looked up at him, surprised. "What brought this on?" He shrugged. "Your sister's letter today. She mentioned your parents might finally be ready to reconcile now that they have 2 grandchildren they've never met." "Ah," Zara understood his concern. "You're worried I miss my old life." "Sometimes I wonder if you deserved better than what I could give you." She turned fully toward him, taking his face between her hands. "Dawson Reed, you gave me everything I never knew I needed: love, respect, partnership, freedom to be myself." She kissed him softly. "What more could any woman want?" His arms tightened around her. "When you put it that way. Besides," she added with a smile, "I'm not just a simple lawman's wife. I'm a respected teacher, co-founder of the Willow Creek Academy for Girls and mother to the 2 most beautiful children in Montana Territory. I'd say I've done quite well for myself." Dawson laughed, the worry leaving his eyes. "When you're right, you're right." As they sat together in the gathering darkness, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a frightened young woman fleeing scandal to a confident wife and mother, respected in her community and secure in her husband's love. The night of their wedding, Dawson had turned her fears into a promise of forever. 5 years later, that promise remained unbroken, strengthened by shared joys and sorrows, by the birth of their children, by the life they had built together in this wild, beautiful land that had become truly home. When they finally went inside, hand in hand, Zara paused to look back at the town below, its windows glowing with lamplight against the vast Montana night. She had come west seeking refuge and found belonging instead. Had fled from one man's cruelty only to discover another man's boundless love. Some might call it fate. Zara called it providence. Either way, she was exactly where she was meant to be, in Dawson's arms, in their home, in the life they had created together. and she wouldn't change a single moment of the journey that had brought her here.